The sound was a thief in the silence of my apartment. Not the groan of the old building settling, or the hum of the refrigerator cycling on. This was the deliberate, hushed creak of the floorboard just inside my front door. The one that only sang when stepped on in exactly the wrong way. My eyes snapped open. The digital clock on my bedside table burned a toxic red, 2:04 a.m. The shape of her was a ghost in the darkness of my hallway. A silhouette I'd know anywhere, frozen mid-step. Ella. My Ella. The woman who had fallen asleep in my arms just a few hours ago, her head on my chest, whispering about a future that had painted itself in brilliant, impossible colors in my mind. My heart didn't hammer. It went cold and still, a stone in my chest. I didn't speak. I just watched, my body paralyzed by a dread so profound it felt like a physical weight. She moved again, a fluid shadow, her hand on the doorknob, turning it with an excruciating slowness designed to mute the click. Ella. The word left my lips, a dry, cracked thing. She went rigid. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly she turned. The streetlight from the window cut across her face, and it wasn't the face I knew. The softness, the warmth, the love, it was all gone. Her expression was a mask of cold, hard impatience. Her eyes narrowed not in guilt, but in annoyance. As if I were the inconvenience. As if I had interrupted her. Our eyes locked in the dim light. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. I saw her jaw tighten. She didn't look like a woman caught in a moment of confusion or sleepwalking. She looked like a predator interrupted on the hunt. Her voice, when it came, was low, flat, and devoid of any emotion I recognized. It was the voice of a stranger. "You don't get to look at me like that," she said, her glare sharp enough to draw blood. "You don't get to be shocked. This was always the deal. You were just too stupid to read the fine print." The door clicked shut behind her, the sound a period at the end of the sentence that had just obliterated my world. I was left alone in the echoing silence, the words "too stupid" ringing in my ears, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of the man I had been. The man who woke up the next morning was not the man who had gone to bed. That man was dead, buried under the rubble of Ella's 2 a.m. pronouncement. In his place was something colder, harder, an entity fueled by a single, crystalline purpose: revenge. Her words were my blueprint. "You were just too stupid to read the fine print." Fine print implied a contract. A deal. I became an archaeologist of my own humiliation, sifting through every memory, every text, every offhand comment she'd ever made. I was no longer Liam, the aspiring graphic designer who loved his girlfriend. I was the auditor, the analyst. My love for her had been a vulnerability, a flaw in my system she had exploited. I would not make that mistake again. I discovered the first thread a week later, buried in a forgotten email chain from her best friend, Chloe. A reference to a client dinner Ella had on a night she told me she was visiting her sick mother. The client's name was Marcus Thorne. A little more digging, the kind that makes your soul feel dirty, revealed Marcus Thorne was not a client. He was a venture capitalist, old money wealthy, and notoriously married. Ella hadn't just cheated. She had been a mistress, a kept woman, and I had been her cover story, her believable, lower-middle-class boyfriend who gave her the appearance of a normal, monogamous life. I was the alibi. The fine print stated I was to be the useful idiot, and I had played my part to perfection. My revenge would not be a crime of passion. It would be a meticulously planned demolition. I needed to destroy the life she valued, the life she had chosen over mine. That life was one of luxury, status, and secrecy. I quit my job. I told my friends a story about a freelance digital nomad dream, but the truth was, my old life was a costume I could no longer wear. I used my entire savings to rent a sterile, anonymous apartment across the city, a place with no memories. It became my war room. The walls were soon papered with timelines, financial records I'd illicitly obtained, photos of Marcus, maps of his usual haunts. My art became forgery. I learned to mimic fonts, official letterheads, the cadence of corporate emails. For months, I lived and breathed their destruction. I ate cold pizza over my keyboard, my eyes raw from screen glare. I ignored calls from my worried mother. I blew off my best friend's wedding. When he showed up at my door, hurt and confused, I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I'm working on something that can't wait. You wouldn't understand." I saw the betrayal in his eyes, the fracture of a 15-year friendship, and I used that pain. I added it to the furnace burning inside me. The cost was irrelevant. Everything was fuel. The plan was simple, elegant, and cruel. I would poison the well of their secret paradise. Using a fabricated identity, I created a trail of digital breadcrumbs suggesting Ella was not a discreet mistress, but a liability. She had been bragging to friends. She had hired a private investigator to dig into Marcus's wife. She was planning to go public unless he left his wife and married her. I planted the evidence where Marcus's paranoid, powerful mind would inevitably find it. A confidential email from a fictional PI to a fictional friend, left open on a public library computer he sometimes used. A fake social media profile of Ella's cousin, boasting about her sister's soon-to-be luxurious life. I watched from the shadows, a ghost orchestrating a haunting. The day it all came crashing down, I was parked in a rented car down the street from their Love Nest apartment. I saw his black sedan screech to a halt. I saw him storm inside. Minutes later, Ella came running out, tears streaming down her face, clutching a suitcase. He followed, his face a thundercloud of rage, and threw a stack of what looked like letters after her. He screamed something I couldn't hear, but the meaning was clear. It was over. She stood on the sidewalk, weeping, her entire world of designer clothes and five-star hotels evaporating before her. A part of me, the old Liam, winced at the raw devastation on her face. But the new creature I had become, the architect, felt nothing but a cold, profound satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. She was exposed, humiliated, and cut off. But it wasn't enough. She had called me stupid. She had to learn that was her greatest miscalculation. Her fall was spectacular. Without Marcus's money, she was evicted from her pristine apartment. The whispers in her social circle became a roar, and she was excommunicated. She got a miserable job at a chain coffee shop. Her hands, once accustomed to holding champagne flutes, now raw from sanitizer solution. I watched it all. I was her silent shadow, her unseen patron of misery. My revenge was my masterpiece, and I consumed her suffering like a fine wine. But the taste was ash. The victory felt hollow. The friendship I had sacrificed left a hollow ache in my chest my triumph couldn't fill. My mother's worried voice on my voicemail was a constant, guilty refrain. I had become a ghost in my own life, a curator of bitterness who haunted only one person, myself. I needed to see the final light leave her eyes. I needed her to know it was me. I needed to hear her say I wasn't stupid. So, I orchestrated our final meeting. I knew her schedule. I went to her shitty apartment, a place that smelled of damp and defeat. I waited for her to come home. When she saw me, leaning against the wall opposite her door, she didn't look surprised. She just looked tired, defeated. The fire that had once glared at me at 2 a.m. was utterly extinguished. Liam, she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. You look like you've seen a ghost, I said, my voice colder than I intended. She unlocked her door and walked inside, leaving it open. An invitation. The apartment was a single room, a far cry from the luxury she'd coveted. On a small table, next to a stack of unpaid bills, was a framed photograph. It was of us, from early on, laughing at a picnic. The sight of it was a physical blow. Why are you here, Liam? She asked, not looking at me. To gloat? I assume I have you to thank for my recent change in circumstances. The fine print, I said, the words tasting like venom. I finally read it. You were right. I was stupid, but I learned. She finally turned to me, and her eyes were pools of a sadness so deep it was bottomless. You think this is about Marcus? About money? What else would it be about? I spat. You traded up. I was just the placeholder. A strange, broken sound escaped her lips. It wasn't a laugh. It was something far more desolate. She picked up the photograph of us. My sister died, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The words meant nothing to me. What? Cystic fibrosis. She died 6 months ago, the night you saw me leaving. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a monster, but a human being shattered by a grief I could never comprehend. Marcus Thorne wasn't my lover, Liam. He was my sister's doctor, the best in the country. His experimental treatments weren't covered by our insurance. They cost a fortune. The world began to tilt on its axis. The walls of my carefully constructed reality started to crack. He's also a predator, she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of steel. He said he would take her on as a patient, for free, if I complied. If I was available when he called. If I provided a discreet distraction from his stressful life. He knew I was vulnerable. He knew I would do anything to save her. She hugged the photograph to her chest. The night she died, he called me. At 1:30 a.m. He was at his apartment, drunk, demanding I come over. He said if I didn't, he would have her removed from the palliative care hospice. That he'd make her last hours a bureaucratic nightmare. So I went. I had to sneak out because I'd told you I was at my parents'. I couldn't tell you the truth. I was so ashamed. And when you caught me, all that shame and grief turned into rage. I took it out on you. I called you stupid because the truth was too ugly to say out loud. She looked around her pathetic apartment. This is my penance. For betraying you. For failing her. But you saw my suffering, and you didn't see a person in pain. You saw a target. You saw a project. She met my eyes, and her gaze was no longer cold, but unbearably pitying. You were so consumed with proving you weren't stupid that you became monstrous. You didn't want truth. You just wanted to be right. The weight of what I had done collapsed onto me, crushing the breath from my lungs. My revenge, my masterpiece, was built on a foundation of lies. I hadn't punished a traitor. I had systematically destroyed a victim. I had become worse than Marcus Thorne. He had exploited her grief. I had weaponized it. I had wanted her to see a ghost when she looked at me. Instead, I was the one who was haunted. The ghost was the man I had been, and he was staring at the monster I had become in utter horror. I had spent a year meticulously planning the destruction of my prison, only to realize I had been its chief architect all along. The door had never been locked. I had simply preferred the darkness inside. I turned and walked out of her apartment. I walked out of her life. There were no words left. No grand confrontation. Just the deafening silence of my own ruin. I had sought to make her pay for a single moment of cruelty, and in doing so, I had dedicated a year of my life to a greater cruelty. The cost of my revenge was not her downfall. It was my own humanity, and it was a price paid in full. Moral of the story: revenge is a bomb that shatters the hand that holds it long before it ever reaches its target.